Hi guys. All right, welcome to our next lesson. So if you are second or sixth period, this is going to be due Friday before midnight. If you are first or fifth period, then this is due Monday before midnight. Okay, so it's always due, your assignment is always due the day before the next assignment. I don't want you to have two open assignments, so that's why this is the way that we're doing it. All right, so we're working on function composition. So we're kind of jumping ahead. What I did is I talked to the pre-cal teachers, and there's a list of things that they would like us to make sure that we cover prior to you guys going on to regular pre-cal. So I wanted to make sure that we hit upon the important stuff. So we're going to kind of drift out of our book a little bit and just be working on this stuff. All right. Okay. So we talked about what functions were. Remember vertical line test to test whether or not a graph is a function. Remember the f of x. That's what we say here when we look at this. We call it f of x, or this is g of x. So those are just naming the function so you can distinguish between the two different ones. Okay, so composition of functions. So the way it looks is this right here. This is what it looks like, or it can look like this. Okay, so it does order matter. So if you notice on this first one, we have f of g of x, and on this second one, we have g of f of x. So the order matters there, and it does make it different. The other way that you can see this is you can see it with a little tiny open circle in between the two letters. That also means composition of functions. So basically what we're doing is we're taking one function and sticking it inside of the other function. Okay. All right. So when we look at this, or get rid of all this stuff so we can talk. All right. So when we're looking at this first one, so when we have f of g of x like this, what that means is we always start with the innermost function. So we're going to start with our g of x function, and then we will take that answer and plug it into the f of x function. Whereas in the last column, we have g of f of x. So we're going to start with our f function, and then we'll take that answer and plug it into the g function. Okay, you have 16 problems that you're going to be working on. I'm actually going to do 3 of them with you. So then you only have 13 problems. All right, so on this first one, so here's our f of x function, here's our g of x function. Now, notice we have this right here, and notice this 5 in here. That 5 tells me I'm going to plug a 5 into this first function, the number 5. So I'm going to put the number 5 in my g of x function. So it's going to look like this. We have g of x. Instead of it being x plus 9, I'm going to replace that x with the number that's up here in this. So 5 plus 9. I'm going to go ahead and solve that. So it gives me 14. All right. So now we're going to take this 14. We're going to take that answer and we're going to plug that into the f function now. So my f of x function is 2 times x. So 2, instead of x, I'm going to write what I found when I plugged 5 into my g function to start with. So this would be 2 times 14, which gives me 28. So 28 is my answer there. So if I'm doing composition of functions, my f of x function is 2x, my g of x function is x plus 9, and I'm finding f of g of x, that gives me 28 as my solution. Okay? All right, so now we're going to do it the opposite way. Now, sometimes people would think, oh, it's just opposite, so it's still going to be the same answer, but it's not at all. Sometimes it can turn out to be the same answer, but more than likely it's not going to. All right, so now we have g of f of 5. All right, remember these parentheses, just think of it, that's where we say the word of. So we have g of f of 5. So I'm going to start with the innermost function. So we start with our f of 5. So go back over here. I'm going to remind myself my f function is 2x. So f of x equals 2 times my x, which in this case is 5. Go ahead and solve that to be 10. Now I take this answer and I'm going to plug that now into my g of x function. So g of x, again, g of x is x plus 9 equals, instead of x, I'm going to write down my solution I just found. So 10 plus 9, and that gives me 19 as my solution. Okay, so f of g of 5 is going to be 28, and g of f of 5 is going to be 19. Okay, two different solutions. All right, let's jump down to number 5. Okay, jump down to number 5. All right, so number 5. So now we have f of g of 6. So I'm going to start with the innermost function. So I plug a 6 into the g function. So when I plug a 6 into the g function, I'm going to have, so my g of x equals 3 times 6 squared plus 2 times 6 minus 1. All I'm doing is plugging the 6 in for the x in the g function. All right, so now I'm going to solve this. Now remember, order of operations tells us that we are going to do exponents first. So 6 squared gives me 36. 36 times 3 is going to give me 108. 2 times 6 gives me 12, and then minus 1. So when I work that out and I get a solution there, it's going to end up giving me 119. Okay, so when I plug 6 into the g function, I get 119. Now we have to take this solution right here, 119, and I'm going to plug that into the f function. So my f function is 4 times x. So we have f of x equals 4 times 119. And when I do that on my calculator, I end up with 476 as a solution. Okay, so again, all you're doing is, all this is plug and chug. You just got to make sure you go in the correct order. That's it. All right. Okay, so now we're starting with the second one over here. We're starting with f of 6 first. Okay, so we're going to plug 6 into the f function to begin with. So my f of x function is 4 times my x, which in this case is 6. So this gives me 24. That was pretty simple. Now we're going to take this 24 and we're going to plug it into our g of x function now. All right, so my g of x function is going to be 3 times 24 squared plus 2 times 24 minus 1. So then this is just calculator work. I don't expect you to know 24 squared in your head. So grab a calculator and work it out, or grab your phone and do the calculator app. Whatever you have to do to figure this out, just grab a calculator, whatever form that may look like. Okay, so when I plug all of that in, I end up with 75 as my solution. That's what you should have gotten when you put it into your calculator. Okay, again, all of these are plug and chug. It's just a matter of doing it in the correct order. Okay, all right, now we're going to jump down to number 9. Okay, number 9. I want us to look at the function here, number 9. So the first one is a quadratic. Not too bad. We know quadratics. We just did one, right? And then the g of x function is an absolute value function, right? Still just plugging numbers into a function. That's all you're doing, plug and chug. All right, so we start with g of x, and we're plugging -1 in. So my g of x equals, make this a little bigger. Okay, so we have 2 absolute value of 3 times x. My x in this case is -1, minus 2, and then minus 3. Okay, so what we're going to start with is we start with what's inside of the absolute value sign. Okay, still order of operations. So I'm going to start with 3 times -1 gives me -3. And then I have minus 2. -3 minus 2 gives me -5. So we have 2 absolute value of -5 minus 3. Now, the absolute value, remember, is the distance from 0. A distance is never negative. So we have, so this turns into 2 times 5 minus 3. We actually lose that negative, remember? So 2 times 5 gives me 10 minus 3 ends up giving me 7 as my solution. Okay, 7 is the answer there. All right, now we're going to reverse that. So now we're going to start with our f of -1. So we're going to start with our f function. So that's our x squared plus 3x minus 1. So we're going to have, oh, wait a minute. What did we forget to do? This is a really common mistake, and I just did it. I can pretend like I did it on purpose, but I did not. All right, we got 7 as our answer, but we're not finished, right? So 7's the answer, but we're not done. We haven't plugged that back into the f function yet. So now we're going to take this 7 and we're going to plug it into this f function. So we have 7 squared plus 3 times 7 minus 1. Again, calculator work, guys. That's perfectly fine. It's okay to use calculator. So 49 plus 21 minus 1 is going to give me 69. So this answer here, I apologize, is 69. All right. Now let's go on to the next one. So that's a really common mistake, and I did not purposely do that, although I'd like to pretend I did, but I didn't. I didn't purposely do that. Okay, so now we're going to start with our f of x function. So we're plugging -1 into our f function. All right, so if we pull over here, so my f of x equals -1 squared plus 3 times -1 and then minus 1. -1 squared, be careful, on your calculator it's going to say -1, but it's not. Remember, it's a positive 1. So this is 1. 3 times -1 is -3, and then -1. So 1 minus 3 minus 1 is going to give me -3. That's our first part. Okay, now we're going to take this -3 and we're going to plug it into our g of x function. All right, so now we have 2. This is our g of x. We have 2, absolute value of 3 times -3 minus 2, and then minus 3 on the end. So again, start with inside the absolute value. 3 times -3 gives me -9. -9 minus 2 gives me -11. And because it's absolute value, what happens to it? That's right, it becomes positive. So now I'm really looking at 2 times 11 minus 3. So 2 times 11 gives me 22, and then minus 3 gives me 19 as my solution. So my answer here is going to be 19. All right? Okay, so there are 16 problems. I just did 3 with you, so that makes 13 problems. This is a lot, so what I'm going to do is this. You guys, for your homework, for your submission, you are going to pick any 9 problems to complete. Now, that does not include the 3 that I just did with you. Actually, I'm sorry. Let's make that 8. Sorry. 8 problems. Okay? Pick any 8 problems. So that's not including, that does not include number 1, 5, and 9, right? So you're going to do an additional 8 problems. Okay? And then make sure you have your work and submit everything to me. Okay? Again, don't forget about your due dates, depending on what period you are, depends on when that due date is. If you have questions you're not understanding, please contact me. Start with Teams first, and then you can do Schoology, but Teams is so much faster. If you are confused, you don't understand, please ask me. Also, if it's an issue for you guys to turn this in, I feel like I'm giving you more time than normal to get stuff done. But if you have an issue with the due date, please contact me. Again, we'll talk through it. All right, guys? All right. Any questions? Contact me. That's what I'm here for. All right. I'll talk to you guys later.